Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Ben Butina. He received his Ph.D. from North Central University, currently works as a director for ASPCA in instructional design and delivery, and hosts his very own IO podcast called The Department 12. Welcome, Dr. Butina.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us today. We're excited that it's our first person to come on that has their own podcast. Uh, and for our listeners, we actually asked Dr. Butina a couple of questions like prior to opening up our own podcast about like best tips and stuff like that. It was super helpful getting us started.
Yeah, I've been listening to the show and really impressed with the progress you've made. We were talking a little bit before we got started today, but just really liking it. I love the last episode, the interview with Dr. Alexis Fink. Yeah, I just really love what you're doing. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. No, we really do appreciate that. That means so much, especially coming from a seasoned pro like you. Uh, and that kind of leads us to our topic today. So, as somebody who has done a podcast and as people who are currently working on podcasts, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the process of working on a podcast and like what your ultimate goal was when you started yours.
Sure. When I started the podcast, my goal was different than it is today. When I started, it was really out of a sense of kind of isolation. So I finished I got my PhD online because that's pretty much the only practical option I had. So I wasn't surrounded by, other students or faculty who were, also interested in IO psychology. And I wanted to find a way to talk to them. And a podcast seemed to be a pretty good way to do that. The second reason I started it is that I was looking for an IO Psych podcast and I couldn't find one. I just don't think anyone had made one before I thought to do that. So I started doing that, and I will say that my motivations kind of changed over the years because that sense of isolation has really, dissipated. I have a lot of good connections in this field, a lot of great people in this field. So I don't really need to scratch that particular itch anymore. But over time, the show has just evolved so that, I'm getting emails from people now entering graduate school who were listening to the show when they were an undergraduate saying, hey, you really influenced me to enroll in an IO Psych grad program. And I've had, enough of those kinds of emails that it's really, really encouraging. And I know that it's bringing some value for the audience out there beyond the value it's bringing for me. So,
Yeah, that's great. Would you say, have you seen an uptick in like any other IO Psych podcasts pop up? Because I did a little research too before starting this one. And I had the same like feeling. I was like, wow, I'm not really finding a lot of podcasts on a field that might not be as big as we make it out to be, but it's still known.
yeah, I mean it's our world, right? So it seems very big, but as far as psychology subdisciplines go, there aren't that many of us. And we're kind of spread out. There's concentrations in places like New York, Boston, where you're at right now, Washington D.C., and a few others. But other than that, we're kind of spread out. Um, we're not as well understood or well known as most other kinds of psychologists, like clinical psychologists or experimental or social psychologists. So I think what we sort of have going for us is this long-term kind of uh, like underdog mentality that we're always sort of fighting for recognition and fighting for others to know who we are and what we do. And it feels like it has been a part of the culture for at least as long as I've been involved in it.
Yeah, no, and it will be kind of interesting too, because as we've stepped into this field, we've met a lot of people, and people are now starting to try and go down this avenue as well of like trying to find and create podcasts to create some content because we are those underdog mentality types, and to kind of
Yeah.
try and find somebody out there who can listen and get the voice out there is really important. We've been finding some value in that. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And to more directly answer the question that you asked earlier, yeah, I have definitely seen an uptick in IOPsych podcasts. It's still not, we're not going to get the kind of numbers that you get for Serial or, something designed for a general audience. But the number of podcasts and the number of just really good quality podcasts has really increased. I mean, I listen to them as much as I can. As you can imagine, sometimes you need a break from this stuff. But I think it's really grown, and I've been pleased to see the change in formats. Your show is focused more on students. Mine is more of a general. There's others that are reaching out to lay people, non-IO folks. It's been great to see, and I think there's still more formats to explore. I think debate is a great format that hasn't been done in podcasts yet, at least as far as IO psychology goes. Movie commentary, I have seen a few folks doing that. It looks like a lot of fun, but there's probably a lot of concepts we could explain through movie commentary and sort of keeping things fun and light. But yeah, I think there's just still so much unexplored potential out there, both within and without the IO Site community for new kinds of podcasts.
Never thought about like a movie commentary sort of format. You mean just like pointing out IO principles within like popular pop culture?
Yeah. So, sort of analogous to what, you talked to Dr. Sai Islam a few episodes back about
Mhm.
the Marvel work that he's done, and Dr. Mike Urich and others have been working on. But yeah, the same kind of principle. You could take a movie like Office Space, which isn't, very current popular culture, but is still surprisingly relevant when you watch it. You could explain an awful lot about IO psychology just commenting on that movie scene by scene. And it would be a heck of a lot more fun way to learn about some of these topics than the way we go about it.
Yeah, no, I like that too because I feel like things. I know one thing that put IO psychology on the map was that show Billions. Like everybody talks about that show and about the like one IO psychologist who's on there.
We literally just talked about it today
Yeah.
with Dr. Islam on the ferry. That's so funny you brought that up.
I have no
So,
idea about this.
oh yeah, so there's a resident in-house IO psychologist on that in that show, and whether you can like whether you've seen it or not, like I've only like seen part of an episode, but when people ask what I'm trying to do in grad school, I'm just like
Oh,
I reference that, and now everybody knows what I'm trying to do. Like it just makes it
perfect.
make sense for them.
It's taken so long to get to that point, but it's great that we have somebody we can point to. Now, you've seen the show?
I only watched like half of one episode. I wanted to
Okay.
get into it. I believe it was on HBO, but I'd have to double check that. And so I didn't have a subscription at the time, so I just watched with like a friend, and
Okay.
then
I'm gonna have to
didn't
check
end up
that out.
watching
I'd
it
love to
after.
know whether the character does anything that, whether it aligns with what we really do.
Yeah, it
Well,
might be glorified a little bit, but we'll find out. We'll watch it too. We could do some commentary on it maybe.
Maybe.
that'd be pretty cool. Like special episode, over the summer. It is cool though. It would be fun to see more like IO in like entertainment and pop culture. We'd have to like turn the podcast into a reality TV show. Each episode is like a new theme in IO. It's just like a leadership episode.
A day going through the cohort, basically, just like
Ooh.
a day in the life as a grad school student. I
Oh
think that would
yeah.
be very interesting.
It would take a lot of editing to pull that off, but it would be interesting. Oh, I love the idea of sort of an audio documentary that follows a student or maybe somebody that's in the field through a day. I think that could be really interesting. Another sort of angle I've thought through on this is even more of an audience is we know we struggle communicating that we exist, especially to younger people. Many people that I interview on my show, I ask them, well, how did you get into IO psychology in the first place? And almost always they say, well, I started out in clinical psych or I was started out in business. And then I just kind of found out about IO psychology almost by accident, maybe when I was a junior or a senior. And that's sort of what turned for them. So, one of the audiences that it would be great to reach is younger people, just to let them know that we exist. And a show that I always thought would be fascinating would be like a show geared for, like maybe 10 to 13-year-olds that is about like the world of work, like a different job every week. So to kind of build on that documentary idea that you shared, interview a couple of people that do this specific job. Let's say it's something unusual like funeral director. So you interview a couple of funeral directors, ask them, what do you like about the job? What don't you like about the job? Use some of those job analysis skills, maybe even call the show job analysis. But, every week or every month or whatever your release schedule is, it would be cool to have an episode that kids and parents could listen to together to learn about like possible jobs in the future or careers that would be actually fun and not kind of preachy. And that would be a way to introduce kids to, oh yeah, and the people or the person doing this is something called an IO psychologist who looks like a work psychologist. That would be an interesting way, I think.
I feel like we're just listing off a bunch of like $1 billion ideas over here. Just for our listeners out there are going to listen, and somebody's going to put this into action, hopefully. But no, it's cool too, because I feel like a lot of people when they're young, like I've talked to a lot of people, and they've all said that the reason why they became an IO psychologist is they know how important work is to individuals, and they want to try and increase the enjoyment that these individuals get at that part of their life. And like some people who are young might have that same desire and not know that this field exists. So they'll go into like something else, whether that be business, or they go into management because they're like, I want to manage people and make sure their lives are better. And I feel like IO is such a untapped potential field for that same reason, because so many people want that.
Yeah, that's such a great point. When you think about the average person and how much of their life they're going to spend at work, it's more than any other waking activity. It's probably more than anything other than sleep. This is what we're going to spend most of our lives doing, is working. And so anything that we can do to make that experience of work better is going to increase the quality of life for everyone. And that is an exciting prospect. It's discouraging that given how important work is and career is to most people, that our little subfield of IO psychology mostly gets ignored in intro psych textbooks. I was once upon a time part of the Getting IO into Intro Psych Textbooks task force over at SciUp. And that, the name of the task force is exactly what we were trying to do. And, we made some progress.
Well, I believe Dr. Salter was in that too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so we did make some good progress with that team, but it's still kind of baffling that this subfield that deals with something that's so important and plays such a big role in people's lives, can't even get a chapter in an intro psych textbook or, even one of those sidebars. But you raised just a really good point that work is really important. And even if work is not in itself all that interesting to you, the spillover effects from work to your life outside of work and vice versa are, intricate, interesting. And to your point, if you're trying to make life better, it's a really good place to try. It's a lot of leverage if you're looking at work.
No, yeah, you made an interesting point before too about like getting them into textbooks to get students to know about it, and then especially like younger kids not even really knowing much about jobs. When we look at our analytics, it's mostly people 22 and older, which I understand, whether it's grad students listening to it or about people right about to apply to grad school. Um, but just getting students and young kids just in the knowledge of IO, I think would just, I mean, it would have saved me a headache so much. And I know if it saved me a headache, it would have saved other people. Just knowing that other field about psychology that is still dealing with helping people, but in regards to like clinical or school, it can be so different. And just knowing that IO psychology was out there would have just made things a whole lot better. um, guess we're glad that we found our way here. Um,
Yeah,
but
amen.
I liked your idea. Yeah, right. I like your idea of whether it's like through TV shows or like maybe trying to get people, younger kids, not like younger adults, listen to like the podcast. Um, but I wonder what other ways we could get like high schoolers besides intro to psych textbook. So we know that's tough enough as it is, but just get the word of IO out there. Like I don't think I've ever even heard of like an IO style high school course.
There are some. I mean, the interesting thing is at my high school, uh, psychology wasn't even required. So I didn't take any like psychology courses. Like they had an AP Psych course, but you didn't have to take it.
Oh, okay.
So the idea of psychology itself needs to grow with the idea of IO almost. And maybe that's just because I'm from Nevada. They do things different over there. But
So another way that we can reach students at that age is to reach out to their teachers. One of the things we found during that task force, or while we were working on the task force, was that there were a lot of teachers and instructors who really wanted to teach some IO psychology, but they didn't feel confident that they knew how to do it. And so a lot of resources were developed to try to help them. One that I worked on, it's called the Introduction to IO Psychology mini course. And anyone that would like to take that, or if you're an instructor and would like to use it in your course, you can find it at www.department12.com. And it's free for anyone to use. It will generate sort of a certificate. So if you want to assign it as an assignment or an extra credit, a lot of instructors do that. You can do that, but it's an online course. It takes about a half hour. It was written, the content of it was written by other people, so I can't take any credit for that. But I more or less just brought it into this format and gave people a way to get to it. And since we started, it's been completed by 8,230 students. I've just checked it right now.
Oh, that's
Oh,
awesome!
wow.
Congratulations.
Congrats. Yeah.
And most of those are at colleges, but I would say, maybe a quarter of them or a little less are at high schools. So this is getting picked up at, psych classes and AP psych classes in high schools. So that's another way to do that, is just to recognize that most of their teachers aren't going to have any background in this. And so if we want them to be able to share it, we have to equip those teachers as well.
That's a very good point, Ben, because when you're talking about providing them with material, a lot of the times, like just like these kids can't get the material, neither can the teachers. So providing not just the children with that opportunity, but providing the teachers with it to maybe pass that message along. Because one kid gets the message to one person, but one teacher gets that message to an entire class. So I feel like you just brought up an amazing point about like getting the resources for them to learn it. So with that too, like I wanted to ask you, as somebody who has been going through this, trying to grow IO, Joe and I have been working on trying to grow the field. When looking at these methods, what personally have you seen that's the most effective aside from that relational aspect that we were talking about, or all these other unique ways? Like, what ways have you seen that's like the most effective?
Well, it's a hard question to answer because, I can talk anecdotally, but I only see a very small piece of the whole picture. And so I think the research is probably a better place to go to see what's been most effective. But one of the things I've found that is just not effective is, our general way of going about communicating science is based on something called the information deficit model. And that's just a fancy, model for the idea that, hey, other people don't agree with us about these things because they don't understand. If they knew what we knew, then they would agree with us. And so the approach based on that is, well, we're just going to tell those other people what we know. And then when they understand it, hopefully they'll agree with us. And the thing about the information deficit model is that it mostly doesn't work. Um, there's a lot of research that's been done on science communication, and, they've mostly found that it's just not effective. Sometimes it's even, counter effective. People end up more entrenched in their views than they were before. And that's sort of the predominant way I see a lot of IO psychologists interacting in the world, as if the only thing that makes someone not agree with them is that they just don't have the right information. So we just need to, break it down to the 7th grade reading level and then share it with them, and then they'll agree with us. So I think approaches that are more collaborative, that start by reaching out to the other person and figuring out their perspective, and then sharing your perspective as an equal rather than, touting it as an expert, is what the research shows us is a more effective way to do it. I think the frustrating thing for people about that is that sometimes you don't get to see the good results right away. You just plant a seed and kind of walk away and hope that it, takes root at some point.
Yeah, like when you're talking about that, like that really makes me think about some potential ways. I know that we've had guests on and we've talked with so many people about the idea of talking about things maybe in layman's terms. And as IO psychologists, especially ones that are internal and not working with a lot of other IO psychologists, that's what their jobs predominantly like look like on a daily basis. I'm just wondering, like, have you found any material that's maybe co-authored with somebody who might be a manager and somebody who's an IO psychologist that kind of finds that middle ground? Because I'm thinking about that and I think that would be a great way to start.
You know, I'm almost sure that I have, but the name escapes me. But the idea of a book where it's co-authored by an academic or a practitioner, I think is a fantastic idea. Another another kind of random podcast idea I've had at one point is just called Mind the Gap, where we take an academic who focuses on a topic, like let's say organizational citizenship behavior, and then we get a practitioner who's actually out in the field working, um, trying to figure out how to apply that research in the real world and get them together to talk about the research, about the application, share their perspectives so they understand where each of them is coming from. And it doesn't have to be a podcast. It could just as well be a YouTube series, a series of videos on, TikTok, Insta Reels, whatever the next thing is going to be. Um, I think that kind of content is probably more appealing to most people than, just sort of dry presentation of facts. Here's who we are and here's what we do. I think another great example of that is Dr. Lisa Kath, who does the memes. She does IO Psych memes, and they're really good. And I think over time she's gotten even better at it. And so it's something that a lot of people react to, even if they weren't aware of IO Psych before. So innovative ideas like that, I think, to just sort of put our nose in new territory.
That'd be a great series, like a Mind the Gap. I feel like I'd watch that. I definitely would watch that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Let us know if you get that up and running. I'll be your first listener.
It's a
But you
lack of
brought up an
free time
interesting
that gets
point.
in the way now.
Yeah, because I know we were talking about people not really knowing about IO, especially like high schoolers and younger people. And you brought up an interesting point about like TikTok and like social media. Would you think that would be like a way to get more people involved in the field of IO? Is like utilizing those um, other forms of social media? Because I know we do the podcast and we have Instagram and Twitter, which we're slowly growing. um, but it's an idea that
Mhm.
popped into our head was if you're on like TikTok or what do
Reels.
they call them, like Instagram
Instagram Reels.
Reels
Yep.
or Shorts or whatever they're called.
If you can't tell, I run the Instagram.
As you can't tell, I'm not a huge, but still learning social media as I go. Um, but it seems like those are like all the hype now, and I wonder if not maybe not instead, but just on top of like a
Oh
regular
yeah.
podcast episode is like a 30-second video like job analysis, blah blah. This is what it is. This is what you like to do, and I wonder how that would even work.
Yeah, so I think the platforms, and there are IO Psych folks out on each of those platforms. If you do the hashtag search, there's some good content out there. It can give you some ideas of what you could do. I think though that it's our traditional way of approaching these things is, okay, here's this new platform, so let's just take what we want to say and figure out how to make it and shove it into this new format. But the formats themselves have certain expectations and standards and that kind of thing. So TikTok, for example, or Instagram Reels, which is pretty close to TikTok frankly, and so is YouTube Shorts for that matter. um, it's about humor for the most part. Sometimes it's about music or something else, but usually it's about humor. So if I were going into one of those platforms, I'd look at what is it that's actually succeeding there. So what could we do to make IO Psych funny? Most of those concepts that we learn, we can think of funny examples of it or extreme examples of it. You could make sketches around it, for example, something like that. But I think you need some kind of hook other than, hey, we're IO Psych and you should pay attention to us. I call that like the eat your vegetables kind of pitch. You know, we can talk till we're blue in the face about all the vitamins and what's going to happen if you don't eat your vegetables, but it's not very persuasive. Um, we need to put a little sugar on it.
Short dramatic films featuring
Brando.
IO pros.
or little clips from movies. I don't know how that works with copyright, honestly, but there are examples from movies, even if they aren't work related, that you could use in a funny way to illustrate certain concepts. Yeah, but absolutely, I think social media and whatever is next is what I'm looking for. TikTok's probably peaked out, and with all the controversy around it, I don't know where it's going, but short uh, short form videos seem to be huge right now, but I'm wondering what is that next thing. because for the longest time it was just plain text or pictures of your kids or whatever. And then it became sort of professional looking short videos. And now I'm just wondering what the next content frontier is.
Whatever shortens our attention spans even more. I don't know how you can get shorter than those like 5 second small videos.
That's a fact.
Yeah, but it will be interesting to see. I know there's like TikTok is already getting banned, I think, in some states, right?
Yeah, I think I
So
heard
maybe
that.
it is like Instagram Reels, or honestly, I bet there will be some new app that'll come out in the next couple of years that'll just like take everyone by storm.
That's how it goes.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the obvious sort of contender here is VR or AR. Um, but it's been interesting to follow that because, there were a couple of years where it was really exploding in terms of, getting to, like, say, the Quest 2 being a consumer model VR headset. And now it just feels like it's fizzled out a little bit. But I would think that maybe the next step in social media is really more immersive. Something VR or AR related where there's some sense of embodiment in some environment. And how we can use that to promote IOPsych, I don't know yet, but
That's a crazy idea. Immersive social media.
It could be like throwing you into a toxic work environment virtually.
You're
well, yeah,
15-year-old high schooler.
I mean that's one example. Another would be like, I'm a middle-aged white guy, right? So I've experienced very few microaggressions in my life, right? So what would it be like for me if I did? Well, a VR sort of scenario that takes me through that and sort of adds in some microaggressions so I can see what that feels like. Well, that might help me understand things a little bit better. That might make me be a little more sympathetic and empathetic to others. I think there's lots of stuff like that, work related or not, that's got some potential in VR. But for some reason, it's just, I don't know, feels like it's stalled. But we'll see where it goes.
That's a actually great idea, Ben. But I do want to leave you here with one more question to just give to our audience as we talk about these students out there who are trying to get their idea on IO psychology. What's
Mhm.
your one bit of advice for them out there?
Don't be afraid of statistics. It's probably the number one thing that holds people back from applying to higher level program or even entering into it as a major, because they know that statistics are a big part of what we do. I was intimidated by that as well. But what you need to know is that once you learn it, you will love how useful it is. Um, I'm not a person that anyone would ever have said in the past that I was like a math lover, but I love statistics because they are so useful. And the resources available to help you get over that, to present the same concepts in different ways than maybe your instructor or your textbook does, out on YouTube, out on other platforms, is just better than it's ever been. So you have, a better chance of getting over that statistics hurdle than anybody has in the history of the world. So go for it. Don't let it scare you. You can get through it.
I 100% agree. I know, like the first statistics course that I took, I was like, oh no, like what is this? But it's one of those things that once you get and once you start learning more about that, it just connects, and then you're like, oh, I understand this, and then you read papers and you understand the methods and results sections, and you're like, everything's starting to fit, and you're like, wow, how did I like not know this stuff before? Especially being a psych student. So it really is a great piece of advice.
Yeah, it's almost like the magic eye that was big back in the 90s, where all of a sudden the image would emerge off of this sort of poster in front of you. There used to be these big mall kiosks where they would be sold. In any case, you probably don't need to get into magic eye, except to say that once you understand statistics, it kind of changes the way you see the world around you, the way you read articles online or on papers and magazines, because you understand a lot more of what you're seeing. So yeah, lean in on the stats.
Absolutely, that's great advice. Thanks for sharing with everything that you've learned so far, Ben. We loved having you on the podcast, and hopefully IO skyrockets after this episode is published.
Yeah, and maybe
It
all
can't
these
help but.
ideas that we workshopped over here might end up might end up coming out. And it's awesome that you were able to sit with us in the beginning and now come here and watch it come to fruition. We really appreciate you giving us some of your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
So that was a pretty cool episode, Growing IO. That was like the first time we ever really thought about like that idea of like talking about it. But when you really think about it, uh, it's super prevalent and important to discuss. And who better to have than Ben with his IO podcast that we know is so big and has helped so many people.
Yeah, like he was starting one of the first of those IO podcasts really out there. So he was kind of like a major market mover for us people out here now doing all these podcasts. It's really interesting too to get to talk to him about that and hearing some of his ideas. I feel like we gave some of our listeners some great ideas out there. So if you guys heard something and you really liked it, go ahead and do it because like we're all out here for the same thing to try and grow this field.
Yeah, absolutely. We're hoping that this podcast reaches like so many people who don't know about IO, and hopefully it's helping out a lot of people. I want to say one thing. Make sure to we're having a website come out in the near future, which by near future I mean hopefully soon. But that will come out, and we'll have hopefully blog posts and other research on IO. So make sure to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.